Wonderful. Thank you all. That was just wonderful. And now, Elizabeth, if you would like, it would be excellent to have you come on stage so we can receive your wonderful teachings. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Good morning, everybody. I feel very excited and honored to be here at the festival again this year. And I think we all know that the topic of this conference is sacred insight and feminine wisdom. So I want to begin, or throughout this morning session, talk about how that is understood and practiced in my tradition. And the tradition I practice is the Buddhist Mahayana. Sacred insight doesn't have to do with any one religion. It's not the domain of any one spiritual tradition, but has to do with what it means to see the world without confusion, in an unmistaken and very direct and fresh way. And I've felt myself, and I think since I was a very little girl, I've had these moments of just kind of fresh seeing, open seeing, unimpeded knowing and feeling very connected. And I don't think that's anything special about me. I think people have these moments of insight and connectedness to the world and feel a feeling of resolve, and there's no moments where there's no struggle. And so, you know, I became very curious about these experiences, and I think that it's a very human experience that people have these moments just by default here and there, just by virtue of being human. And this is a very interesting thing that we explore in this tradition. Sometimes the word grace comes to mind. I know grace is a word that's often used in the Christian tradition, but I often think of grace as being in relationship in a very harmonious way. You know, grace is not something that happens in a vacuum. Grace is something that happens in relationship. For example, if you go into someone's house, they receive you, and they're caring about your needs. Do you want something to hear? Have a comfortable place to sit, have something to eat, you know? There's this kind of grace in relationship. So it has to do with how we find ourselves in relationship to the world around us. So I wanted to say something brief about the Buddha, and then we'll go into a practice that I think I'll need your participation on this one. So the Buddha was somebody, he was a prince. He was born in northern India into a very wealthy situation. He lived in a palace. And when he had these, as a child, he felt a little bit suffocated by the wealth and the kind of sensual pleasures, because he had this very deep feeling that there was more to life than just this luxurious environment. And he started to get curious, and he started to peek outside that situation and see that there was a lot of suffering in the world. And this bothered him profoundly. It was like he wanted to have a true, authentic experience of life, and he wanted to explore it. He didn't want to be protected from that situation. And so at some point, he left the palace and began to wander. And then he became interested in doing practices where there was almost like a rejection of the sensual world. He stopped eating, he stopped wearing clothes, and he stopped kind of indulging. So he went to the other extreme. And at some point, he got so thin and emaciated that he almost died. And at some point, he realized that the world that we inherit, this beautiful world, sensual world, is not something to reject, but appreciate deeply. And he ended up sitting underneath the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, India. It's in northern India. And at the dawn of his awakening, he had a very deep experience, which we could call sacred insight. And I want to talk about this insight with you this morning. So what he said a curious thing after this experience. It sounds a little bit like a puzzle or a koan of some sort. But what he said was, and let me try to make this clear, this being, B-E-I-N-G, this being, that becomes. From the arising of this, that arises. This not being, that becomes not. From the cessation of this, that ceases. So what and let me try to just interpret this for you because it sounds a little bit cryptic or mysterious. But what he's basically saying is that everything arises from causes and conditions. So, for example, if you plant a seed, because of that, there will be a fruit. Because if you are clinging to the self desperately and only caring for yourself, suffering will arise. If you serve others, happiness will arise. It's like we live in this world of interdependent relationships. So everything is affecting everything else. No one lives in a vacuum. Nothing exists in a vacuum. Everything is influenced and interrupted and bumping against other things. And this is creating the world that we experience. So this is what he said. Another way that I often talk about that is everything leans. Everything is leaning up against everything else. So I'm going to try to explain this in a deeper way through these sticks. This is why I brought them. So in the sutras, he has a kind of an image that he describes to illustrate this, two bundles of leads leaning up against each other. So what if one bundle were to fall down? You can shout it out. The other would fall too. I'm going to need your participation strongly in this next practice. So I'm here to do a meditation instruction this morning. So this meditation is kind of interactive meditation that we do out loud together. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and please just yell it out. Don't be shy. So this is to illustrate the kind of poignancy that comes from understanding that everything leans. We often use the word interdependence to talk about this quality of relationship. In Sanskrit, we call it pratitya samutpada. And pratitya samutpada means dependent arising. It's usually translated as dependent arising. The world that we know comes from the fact that everything is leaning and moving. Because things are in relationship, nothing is static. Nothing is still. It's a very dynamic and amazing process. It's like here we're having all this interaction, and everyone here is probably having a very different experience in a certain way. We have language agreements, so there's some similarity, but we all come from different backgrounds, and we all have different ways of seeing things too. So this speaks to the nature of interdependence. So let me ask you some questions. So I'm going to begin by asking you, what would you say? Is this a long or a short stick? Long? All the blue people say long. All the high schoolers think this is, are you sure? Anybody in the group think it might not be? Short. No, it's all short. Anyone else have anything to say? Medium. Yeah. Okay, let me ask you another question. It's a lively group. Now what would you say? Short. It's a short, so it was a long stick and it became a short stick? Shorter. Okay, that's pretty good. Uh-oh, now what? It's become long. So what would you say? You might say that the stick is either long or short. It all depends on perspective. Or relationship. It all depends on its relationship to other things, to the other sticks, right? In this case. Okay, so let me ask you this. Does the length of the stick reside in the stick itself? No. That's interesting, because usually when we look at something, we think whatever we think it is, we assume that it exists from the side of the object, right? Including people. We think they are who we assume that they are. Okay, that's important information, don't you think? Okay, what about the utility of this stick or the meaning of this stick? What can you use the stick for? Fire.
Drawing pictures in the dirt.
Drawing pictures on the beach. Hitting people. Hiking, a walking stick, right? Pointing at things. Okay, good. We have. Okay, thank you. This is the most active group I've ever. So, in other words, the efficacy and the meaning or the purpose of the stick, is it found in the stick itself? No, it all depends, right? It all depends. So everything finds meaning and purpose in the context of relationship. Okay, so let me ask you yet another question. And this is an important question, because what we think this stick is doesn't exist in the stick. But does that take away the value of the stick? In other words, what about size? Is size important? No, size isn't important in our world. Okay, let me tell you why I think size is powerful. Length of something is powerful. For example, everything is based on measurement. Many things are based on measurement. Like, could anybody even get here today without measurement? I had to fly here from Colorado. I had to get in a car. It had to have a certain number of gallons of gas to get to the airport. I got on the plane that was designed by measurement. The plane also had to be loaded with gas, and it had to be measured out. The runway was also based on measurement. You know, measurement is a man-made, it's a contrivance, it's a construct, but it's powerful, isn't it? The clothes we're wearing right now, these are all based on measurement. The clock I'm looking at, I'm pressed for time, that is a measurement. And these are agreements that we have. If I were flying up in the airplane and, when we were landing, if, they called into the control tower, and they said, okay, when can we land? And they said, oh, I don't know, it doesn't matter. I wouldn't be here. So measurement is powerful. So what I'm trying to get at here is that although we can't really say, there's no one to be the arbiter of what something is or is not, that it all depends, to me is a very powerful and interesting thing. It means that we have to have a sense of awe or wonder about the world in which we live. We can never really be right. Do you understand what I'm saying? The fact that that there's no size or no actual purpose, in the stick itself allows us to experience a sense of awe about the world in which we live. A lot of times we look at others, we assume we know who they are, or we assume we know what something means, or we assume that we are right about something. This is a kind of fundamentalism that we all have. We often think fundamentalism is outside. Those other people are fundamentalists. But in fact, the way we look at the world without a sense of awe, without a sense of curiosity, is a kind of a fundamentalism too. And yet, the fact that everything leans, does this mean that we don't have to watch our actions carefully? The fact that we we can't know an object in a definitive way, does this mean we don't have to watch our actions? Does it mean that it doesn't matter what we do? What do you think? Actually, it means the opposite. Why? If everything leans, it means we're part of this greater system of of contingency, of dependent relationships. And so this is where this sense of openness and maybe even you can say faith, because if everything leans, you don't know where things are going to go. If everything leans, you have to have a sense of humility and a sense of appreciation for the world in which we live, because we only ever see a little piece of things. And so there's that aspect of how we walk through the world. There's this sense of openness and connectedness. And at the same time, we have to be extremely precise about how we are with people, the way we interact, the impact we have on the world in which we live. So I think these sticks, this tradition of the sticks comes down from a great master named Chandrakirti. And I read about it in a text, and I thought this is a very interesting way of talking about this tradition. Because on one hand, this tradition is about service and responding to the world in which you live with great tenderness and care, like all of the great spiritual traditions. At the same time, there's this open humility in terms of, if you think you know how something is and there's not that sense of openness and humility, then our actions we come from a more righteous place, that we think we know. We get caught in dogma. We lose our grace. And so I was talking before, actually, about this beautiful image. And the name of this image is Prajnaparamita. It means transcendent wisdom. And that is the way we talk about the sacred feminine in this tradition. So I had this commissioned. A great friend of mine painted this. And this is a representative of the feminine principle in our tradition. So what I thought I'd do is I guide you in a meditation. And all you have to do is really close your eyes and follow along with what I say. Do we have a gong here? Sorry about this. But it's so much. Okay. So what I want to do is bring what we have just done with the sticks into your direct experience. So we have this idea when we sit and meditate. Sometimes it's hard to sit and meditate and look at your mind. Sometimes we feel, as human beings, I always wonder why it is so hard to kind of relax with our experience. Sometimes when we meditate, we feel very peaceful, but at other times, it seems like our thoughts and feelings are coming at us and we don't know what to do with them. And there's this inability to kind of look deeply, like we want to have certain pleasant experiences and then we reject experiences that are kind of rough and unwanted experiences. So how do we sit and enjoy the natural vitality of our mind? That's what meditation helps us do. And when we learn to do this in meditation, then we can take this out into the world with us. And we don't get as caught up in, for example, seeing something and thinking something exists in the object and then fighting with it. We look at somebody, for example, who, seems to get us angry or agitated, and we see that we project that kind of irritation exists in the object. And we don't sit to see that there's so much more there. There's this sense we lose our humility. We become a fundamentalist in those moments. And when we sit in practice, we have these different experiences rise up. How do we work with that? How do we look at it deeply into experience? We might find that it's not what we thought it was. So meditation helps us look at our mind in a more nuanced way. And I thought I would just lead you through this very simple meditation where instead of getting caught up in, like, something will arise and you want to put a lid on it, or you want to grasp at it, or you want to reject it, or you can't just kind of look and be curious. We're talking about an open and curious mind here. Like, you're all students. I think the mind of a student, a genuine, authentic student, is a mind that is very open and curious and very humble. It's probably, to be a student is the highest form of receptivity and intelligence in all of us. Like, how can we keep that sense of openness and curiosity as we move through life? So I want to take you on this little journey into your experience. And it has a lot to do with what the Buddha recognized about causes and conditions. Like, when we're looking at our experience, you might think, oh, I have something uncomfortable arising, like I have a pain, a physical sensation, or something is disturbing. Look into it and see if you can find something that's not made of parts, that doesn't change. And I'll guide you in this, and you'll know more of what I mean. We're going to start by just doing some breathing, just focusing on our breath, and then all you have to do is close your eyes and follow along. So let's start by focusing on our breath. And what that means is that you sit with I'm sitting in a cross-legged position, but just sit relaxed, but with some integrity in your body so that the energy can flow through well. And you close your eyes and you can breathe through your mouth or your nose. And when you breathe in, you can just feel the air coming in through your nostrils or through your mouth and down into your chest. And then, of course, the chest will expand, your lungs will expand. And then you'll notice there'll be just a moment, a space, where before you have to exhale again, and just feel the sensation. We're always breathing, but we often fail to really appreciate that this is happening automatically and how it keeps us alive, and we don't notice even the sensations, like we breathe in a shallow way, so just notice the air come in, the lungs expand, there's this moment, then the out breath, then another moment. So now let's begin by bringing our awareness, just bring it to the top of your head. And I think that's just right there, there's something to appreciate about the fact that we have this language that we can communicate, and even if our eyes are closed, I can say, bring your awareness to a certain part of your body. And even with your eyes closed, you have a sense, you can feel it, your conceptual mind is also working, you have an image. And what I notice when I do this is that wherever I place my awareness, it comes alive with sensation. So just notice at the top of your head, what do you feel? You might even feel the coldness of the air, the sensations of the cool air. You might almost feel like you can feel your hair growing out of your pores. Just notice. In meditation, we don't really have to reject any of our experience. We have, physical sensations and perceptions. We don't have to close anything down. We can appreciate all of it. We can even appreciate that we have uncomfortable sensations, or what we label uncomfortable. And we can notice pleasant or neutral sensations and look deeper into them. So no judging any experience in meditation. And then we bring your awareness down the back of your head, down your face. In your head, we have the eyes and the nose and the ears, the tongue, some of our what we call sense organs or faculties. And you might have feelings of, maybe you have an itch or a tingling sensation. Just look into those. When you look in, what happens? Can you find actually a boundary around a sensation? For example, right now my nose feels kind of cold. So I'm looking at the sensation and I'm thinking, does it actually have I could feel it, it's very vivid. But when I look into the actual area, I notice that I can't exactly find a boundary around that area. And when I look at the sensation, or I feel the sensation, it's constantly changing. There's not like a singular thing I can find. So look in these areas and just see. We have labels for things, but when you actually look, it's somewhat magical. It's like that stick. It's like you think it's a stick, but when you look into it, it has this kind of open dimensional quality to it. You can't exactly find it, but the experience is vivid there. So you can move your awareness down to your ears, to your face, maybe down, let's move it down the neck. Sometimes we all feel a little bit of tightness in our neck. Just put your awareness on that and see, is that a singular thing? We often make it a thing. Ideas are just maps, but when you take a map to a territory, like to a trailhead, when you start to walk the trailhead, it's nothing like the map. There's all kinds of things there's so much movement of energy. That is the map of our neck. There's so much energy, there's sensation. There's movement. It's not a static experience. So let's move our awareness down our arms, into our hands. We have labels for things, arms, hands, but see if you can find the actual place where your arm becomes your hand. Aside from the labels that we place on things, can you find that? Can you find the boundary where your awareness becomes the perception of your body? Can you find the kind of separating line between awareness and body? That's an interesting question. This is really just an inquiry. We're just exploring, like, as if we were looking up at space through a telescope. Notice, your mind has a tendency to want to make something out of your experience. For example, we often think that what we perceive is true. But in fact, everything is quite shifty and quite elusive, amorphous. And that's amazing and magical, because we're experiencing things very vividly. At the same time, when we look at things in a very direct way, we can see that they're not exactly as we think they are. That's the point of this. So then bring your awareness to, let's see, the trunk of the body. Let's move the awareness down, the front and the back of the body. And if you feel some stronger sensations, maybe some pleasant sensations, just look into them and see. Can you find a singular thing there? Or maybe you can walk the territory of the sensation. What do you find? This is just about being curious and open. sometimes, you can place your awareness on things and it can open up, and sometimes your body will speak to you and call you to your attention, so you can put your mind there. And if your mind is wandering, just bring it back. You can move your attention now down through your legs, into your feet. Feel the weight of your body on the ground. Part of this is just to be amazed by the different ways that we know. We know through feeling, we know through sensing things. But it's very alive. I always feel in doing this meditation that things come alive wherever you place your awareness. It's an awareness practice. And you can appreciate how alive we are. There's so much to experience and appreciate. So now bring your awareness back to your breath. Breathing in, you feel the air coming through your nostrils or your mouth, filling up your lungs, and there's a pause. And then exhaling, emptying the air, and then another pause. Very simple, just focusing the mind in a very simple, ordinary way. When you were looking for sensations in the body, or sensations, or even conceptual moments of conceptual mind, did anybody find anything like that's singular? Or when you looked into the territory, did you find it open up? Was that? Not really. I find that an interesting observation, and it has very much to do with the sticks. It's like we think in terms of things. We think nominally, like I have a pain, or this is my head, this is my arm. But when you look directly at the phenomenal world, or the world of experience, you find that it's made up of relationships, and that you can't necessarily find where one thing stops and another thing starts. And that speaks to the nature of dependent arising, or interdependence. It's like we don't live, there's nothing in this world that lives outside the nature of contingency or relationships. And that's really the essential insight that the Buddha had when he awoke under the Bodhi tree. And so I always think it's very powerful, this idea that the world doesn't really lend itself to being known in a definitive way. It's like we look at another person and we assume we know them, but actually the greatest respect we could have for anyone or anything is not to definitively decide we know who they are or assume we know who they are. Because the minute you look into anything, it opens up into this world of infinite contingency. We are not singular, we are not permanent. The world in which we live in, we are influenced by the world in which we live, and we also influence the world. Again, this is why our actions and the way we are and the way we move about the world and have respect for others is so important. So this ability to bear the fact that we can't know is what this female figure represents. Prajnaparamita, transcendent wisdom. And there's a mantra. You know what a mantra is? Yeah, a mantra is a set of sacred sounds. These mantras are in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is a very sacred language. It's like Latin, but in some other traditions, Sanskrit is kind of the basis for the wisdom traditions and the spiritual traditions. So there's a mantra that's associated with Prajnaparamita, the sacred feminine. And we are I want to introduce that to you as the third practice. So we've done a practice where we're interacting, we've done a observation awareness practice, and now I think it would be fun to do some chanting. And we'll chant the Prajnaparamita Mantra. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring this mantra up too is that later on this week, I believe somebody's going to be introducing the Heart Sutra. And this is the mantra that is part of the Heart Sutra. And it goes, Om Gate Gate Para Samgate, Om Gate Gate Para Gate, Para Samgate Bodhi Swaha. And what this means is gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond. So that's a way of talking about Prajnaparamita or transcendent wisdom. And what this basically means is it's not leaving the temporal world. Like we often think that spirituality has to do with, like the Buddha thought at some point, leaving the world behind and just finding some state of perfect peace. But how could one possibly find a perfect peace leaving behind a world in which you're needed, in which really meaning comes from service? And the Buddha came to understand that. So we often separate spirituality from the temporal, the things of the earthly, our earthly existence. But here, we're kind of walking out of that whole system together into a world in which, we're not clinging to reality in the same way, that there's this sense of awe or openness. We often don't value this way of being, I think, in the conventional world. This is where faith, I think, lies. Faith is this kind of openness and humility, this sense that we can't know everything. We can't see the bigger picture. We don't know what's going to happen next, And also, because the truth does not exist in the object, we can't really say what it is. It means different things in different contexts, and it changes all the time. So this notion of openness and humility, and yet this feeling of deep sense of responsibility and interdependence is what this all represents. So gone, gone, gone beyond means we step out of this kind of dualistic split and have this understanding of the way things are and the way things work. So Alzy's going to come up, and we're going to chant. We're going to teach you this. We actually. Am I past the time?
Yes, but it's
okay. Okay.
We're going to end on a bang.
We're going to end on a bang.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is definitely a bang kind of ending.
So it goes like this, and you can see it up there. So I'll sing, and then Alzy's going to join in with me.
Let's make a plan. Should we make a plan?
Okay.
Okay, because we're a little late on the clock, and I have to be clock mindful.
Yeah.
So what do we do?
Because
3
we are
rounds? How many
measuring time.
rounds should we do?
Okay, let's just do 3 rounds.
We'll do 3 rounds. And
Yeah.
then that is your send-off. So I don't mean to be stepping into your zone, but can I do an extra thanks, especially for all the blue people? The blue people.
Yeah, the blue people.
For those of
the
you,
sea of blue.
For those of you visiting virtually, sorry you can't see the sea of blue, but it's a beautiful sea, and they have joined us in this river of love, I would say. Yeah. And so when we're done with the mantra, you all are free to mingle about, and hopefully you'll come back for the 10 o'clock session, which is going to be more Elizabeth and more magic.
Okay, ready? Om Gate gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhiswaha. Om gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhiswaha. Om gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhiswaha. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was so fabulous. Oh my God.